My sister married the bully who humiliated me in school, exposed my private life to my parents, and now wants me to forgive him and be their baby's godparent to fix the family. I still remember the sound of his laughter the first time he humiliated me in front of the whole school. Eric, 35M, had been the king of my high school, the kind of guy who thrived on making people like me feel small. He had a knack for finding your deepest insecurities and turning them into a public spectacle. For me, it was my weight, my shyness, and my private life that he somehow always managed to dig up and exploit. I thought I was done with him after graduation, ready to leave all that behind and never look back. But life has a cruel sense of humor. Because now, over a decade later, Eric isn't just a distant memory, he's my brother-in-law. And worse, he's still tormenting me in ways that cut even deeper. My younger sister, Rachel, 30F, had always been my closest ally growing up. We were inseparable, leaning on each other to navigate our strict, overbearing parents. But that bond shattered the day she introduced Eric as her boyfriend. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. Surely, she couldn't have fallen for the guy who made my teenage years a living nightmare. But she had. She claimed he'd changed, that the man he was in high school wasn't who he was now. I tried to believe her, tried to give him the benefit of the doubt for her sake. But Eric wasted no time proving that he hadn't changed at all. If anything, he'd only grown more manipulative. The worst betrayal came last year when Eric, apparently eager to get closer to my family, decided it would be a good idea to share some private details about my life with our parents. He'd somehow found out about a brief period in my early 20s when I'd been seeing a therapist, a fact I hadn't shared with anyone because I knew how my conservative parents would react. To them, therapy was a sign of weakness, something to be ashamed of. Eric brought it up casually during a family dinner, as if he were discussing the weather. "Did you know Lily, 33F, used to see a therapist?" he said, his tone feigning innocence. "I mean, it's great she got help, but I'm surprised you never mentioned it to your parents." The look on my parents' faces was enough to make me want to crawl under the table and disappear. My mother immediately began interrogating me, asking why I hadn't told them and what was so wrong with me that I needed therapy. My father just shook his head in disappointment, muttering about how he didn't raise his daughters to be weak. I left the dinner in tears, and when I confronted Rachel about it later, she defended Eric. "He didn't mean any harm," she said. "He was just trying to connect with the family. You're overreacting." Overreacting. That's what she always said when it came to Eric, when he made sly comments about my single status, when he jokingly referred to me as the family recluse because I preferred quiet nights at home to wild parties. When he accidentally let slip to my coworkers at a family gathering that I'd once been rejected for a promotion, a rejection I hadn't even told Rachel about. Every time, Rachel excused it as Eric being Eric, insisting he wasn't malicious, just blunt. I tried to distance myself after the therapy incident, pulling away from family gatherings and keeping interactions with Eric to a minimum. But now, Rachel and Eric are expecting their first child, and they've decided that the best way to fix the family is for me to be the baby's godparent. The invitation, or demand, really, came during a family dinner I had reluctantly attended. Rachel was glowing, her hands resting on her growing belly, while Eric sat beside her with his trademark smirk. "We've been thinking a lot about who we want as the godparent for our baby," Rachel said, her eyes locking onto mine, "and we decided there's no one better than you, Lily." I blinked, stunned into silence. "Me?" I finally managed to say. "Why?" Rachel's smile faltered as if she hadn't expected me to question it. "Because you're family, and because this baby could be a fresh start for all of us, a way to let go of the past and move forward." Eric chimed in, his voice dripping with insincerity. "We know we've had our differences, Lily, but this could be an opportunity to put all that behind us. We want you to be part of the baby's life, to be part of our lives." I could feel my face heating with anger. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about Eric trying to paint himself as the bigger person, the magnanimous brother-in-law willing to forgive and forget, all while forcing me to play along with his charade. "I need to think about it," I said tightly, pushing my chair back and standing up. "Excuse me." I left the table and went to the kitchen, gripping the counter to steady myself. I could hear Rachel and Eric whispering in the dining room, their voices too low to make out the words, but carrying that unmistakable tone of annoyance. A few moments later, Rachel appeared in the doorway. "Lily," she said softly, her face filled with that faux concerned look she always used when she was trying to guilt me into something. "I know this is a lot to ask, but it's really important to us. To me." I turned to face her, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Do you have any idea what you're asking, Rachel? After everything Eric has done, everything he said about me, you want me to stand up in front of everyone and pretend like we're one big happy family?" Her face hardened, the concern replaced with frustration. "This isn't about you, Lily. This is about the baby. You're going to be an aunt, and I want my child to grow up in a family that's united, not divided." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you married the person who made my life hell," I snapped. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly composed herself. "You need to let go of the past, Lily," she said coldly. "People change. Eric isn't the same person he was in high school, and if you can't see that, maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe it's you." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. She had always been good at twisting things, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. But this time, I wasn't going to let her guilt me into submission. "I'll think about it," I said flatly, knowing full well that my answer wouldn't change. Rachel sighed, clearly unhappy with my response, but she didn't push further. As she turned to leave, I felt a pang of sadness. This wasn't the sister I had grown up with, the one who used to stand by my side no matter what. Somewhere along the way, she had chosen Eric over me, and now she was asking me to forgive and forget for the sake of family. But as I stood there, staring out the kitchen window, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't something I could be bullied into. It wasn't something I could give just to make someone else feel better. And it certainly wasn't something Eric or Rachel had earned. I spent the next few days wrestling with Rachel's request. Her words echoed in my mind, each one digging deeper into my conflicted thoughts. "This isn't about you, Lily." That line replayed over and over as if she had managed to reduce years of pain and humiliation to a selfish overreaction on my part. But how could I possibly forgive Eric for everything he'd done? How could I ignore the fact that Rachel had not only chosen to marry him, but was now asking me to validate their relationship in front of the entire family? I confided in my best friend, Nina, 32F, over coffee. She had been with me through all the hell Eric put me through in high school and had been just as shocked as I was when Rachel introduced him as her boyfriend years later. "You're not seriously considering this, are you?" Nina asked, her brow furrowing as she stirred her latte. "Rachel can't actually expect you to just play happy family with him." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice heavy with frustration. "She's trying to guilt me into it. She keeps saying it's for the baby, that it's about fixing the family." Nina rolled her eyes. "Fixing the family? More like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Lily, you don't owe them anything, especially not after the way Eric has treated you." "But it's Rachel," I said, my voice cracking. "She's my sister, and part of me wonders if I say no, will she cut me out completely? I've already lost so much of her because of him." Nina reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't lose her, Lily. She chose this. And now she's choosing him again, over you. You can't let them guilt you into something that's only going to hurt you more." Her words gave me strength, but the doubts still lingered. That evening, I called my mom, hoping for some support. Instead, I got the same lecture Rachel had given me, only harsher. "Lily, why are you being so difficult about this?" my mom scolded. "Rachel's trying to do the right thing, and you're just holding on to old grudges. Eric has grown up. He's part of this family now, whether you like it or not." "It's not a grudge, Mom," I said, my frustration boiling over. "Do you even know what he put me through in high school? Or how he humiliated me in front of you and Dad with that therapy comment? He hasn't changed, and Rachel's just enabling him." My mom sighed heavily, the disappointment clear in her tone. "Lily, you need to move on. Family is what matters, and Rachel is trying to include you in her life. If you can't let go of the past, you're the one who's going to tear this family apart." I hung up the phone feeling like the walls were closing in. Everyone was so eager to defend Eric, to brush aside his actions and paint me as the problem. It was infuriating, but it also left me questioning myself. Was I overreacting? Was I letting my hurt blind me to the possibility of moving forward? The next day, I received a text from Rachel. Hey, I know we left things tense. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. If Rachel was reaching out alone, maybe she was willing to listen this time. We met at a small cafe, and for the first few minutes, the conversation was polite but strained. Then Rachel got to the point. Lily, I get that this is hard for you, she said, leaning forward. I know Eric wasn't exactly kind to you in high school, but people change. He regrets what he did. Does he, though? I countered, because he sure didn't seem regretful when he outed my therapy to mom and dad, or when he made me feel like a failure in front of my coworkers. Rachel's expression faltered, but she quickly recovered. He didn't mean it like that. Eric just doesn't always think before he speaks. He's trying to connect, to be part of this family, and he doesn't know how to go about it the right way. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're asking me to forgive him for being thoughtless, to ignore all the ways he's hurt me, just so you can have your perfect family picture? Rachel sighed, looking genuinely frustrated. It's not about a perfect picture, Lily. It's about family, about giving the baby a strong foundation. You don't have to be best friends with Eric, but being the godparent, it's symbolic. It's about unity, forgiveness. I shook my head, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. You keep saying it's about the baby, Rachel. But what about me? What about everything I've been through? You've chosen Eric over me every step of the way, and now you're asking me to stand up in front of everyone and pretend like none of it matters. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another attempt to manipulate me. Lily, you're my sister. I love you. I don't want to lose you over this. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. If you loved me, you wouldn't keep asking me to sacrifice my dignity for Eric's sake. This isn't about family, Rachel. This is about you wanting to sweep everything under the rug so you don't have to deal with it. Her face hardened, the tears vanishing as quickly as they'd appeared. You know what, Lily? Maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't about family. Maybe it's about you not being able to let go of the past. You're so focused on what Eric did to you that you can't see how much he's changed. You're the one holding us all back. The words stung, but they also made something inside me snap. No, Rachel. What's holding us back is your refusal to acknowledge what Eric did. You've spent years defending him, excusing him, and now you expect me to forgive and forget just because it's convenient for you. But I'm done pretending. I'm not going to be part of this charade. Rachel stared at me, her face a mix of shock and anger. So that's it? You're just going to walk away from your family? If that's what it takes to protect myself, then yes, I said firmly. I've spent too much time letting Eric and his lies hurt me. I'm not going to let it happen anymore. Rachel didn't say anything as I stood up and walked out of the cafe. My hands were trembling, my chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. I had always hoped that one day Rachel would understand, that she would choose me over the man who had tormented me. But now I realized that wasn't going to happen. As I walked down the street, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't letting Rachel or Eric dictate how I should feel. I was choosing myself, even if it meant walking away from the family I had always tried so hard to hold on to. And that was a step I should have taken a long time ago. After walking out of the cafe, I spent the next few days grappling with a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Rachel's words replayed in my head, over and over. You're the one holding us all back. It was a cruel twist, having my pain and my boundaries turned into the problem, as if my refusal to forgive Eric was what had fractured our family, rather than his years of bullying and manipulation. I decided to keep my distance from Rachel for a while, ignoring her texts and declining her calls. Every time my phone buzzed with her name, I felt the pit of anger and exhaustion in my stomach grow deeper. I couldn't keep engaging in a conversation where my feelings were treated as nothing more than an inconvenience. Then a week later, the family group chat lit up with a message from my mom. Dinner at our place this Friday at 7. Rachel and Eric will be there. Let's sort this out as a family. I stared at the message, my gut twisting. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. I could already hear my mom's voice in my head, stern, dismissive of any protests, pushing the narrative that keeping the peace was more important than acknowledging the harm done. I didn't want to go, but I knew if I didn't show up, it would only add fuel to the fire. My absence would be painted as proof that I was the unreasonable one, unwilling to put aside my petty grudges. So, reluctantly, I agreed. The atmosphere at dinner was tense from the moment I walked in. Rachel and Eric were already seated at the table, Rachel smiling nervously while Eric leaned back in his chair, his usual smugness plastered across his face. My mom and dad were bustling around the kitchen, clearly trying to create an air of normalcy, though the tension was palpable. "Lily," Rachel said brightly, standing to greet me as if nothing had happened. "I'm so glad you came." I gave her a tight smile, brushing past her to take my seat. "I didn't really have a choice, did I?" She frowned but didn't push, instead sitting back down beside Eric, who gave me a nod that was far too casual, as if he hadn't spent years making my life miserable. Dinner started awkwardly, with strained small talk about Rachel's pregnancy and my parents' garden. But it didn't take long for the conversation to shift to the reason we were all there. My mom cleared her throat, setting down her fork with a decisive clink. "Lily," she began, her tone that of a parent scolding a misbehaving child, "it's time we address this tension. Rachel and Eric have gone out of their way to extend an olive branch, and it's time for you to do the same." I opened my mouth to respond, but Rachel jumped in before I could speak. "We don't want to fight, Lily," she said, her voice saccharine. "We just want to move forward as a family, and that starts with forgiveness." I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand, Rachel," I said evenly, "and it's not something Eric has earned." Eric's smirk widened, and he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Come on, Lily," he said, his tone dripping with false charm. "That was years ago. We were kids. Don't tell me you're still holding a grudge over some high school nonsense." "It wasn't just high school, Eric," I snapped, my composure cracking. "It's everything since then. You outed my therapy to my parents, humiliated me in front of my coworkers, and constantly undermined me at every turn. You haven't changed, you've just gotten better at disguising your cruelty." Eric's smirk faltered, and Rachel quickly jumped to his defense. "He didn't mean to hurt you, Lily. He's trying to be part of this family, and you're making it impossible." "I'm making it impossible?" I said, my voice rising. "You married the person who made my life a nightmare, and you've spent years defending him while ignoring how much he's hurt me. And now you want me to just pretend none of it happened? To stand up in front of everyone and play happy family as your baby's godparent? Do you even hear yourself?" "Lily," my mom interjected sharply, her tone brooking no argument. "That's enough. Eric has apologized, and Rachel has made it clear how important this is to her. This family has always valued forgiveness, and it's time for you to put your pride aside and follow that example." My dad, who had been silent up until now, nodded in agreement. "Your mother's right, Lily. Family comes first. You need to let this go." I felt like I was drowning, surrounded by people who refused to see the harm that had been done to me. "You're all so quick to defend Eric," I said, my voice shaking, "but none of you have ever once asked how I feel. You just expect me to sweep it all under the rug because it's easier for you. Because you're making it harder than it needs to be," Rachel shot back, her patience clearly wearing thin. "You're being selfish, Lily. This isn't just about you, it's about the baby." That was the last straw. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, Rachel," I said, my voice firm and cold. "It's about you. It's always been about you. You chose to marry Eric, knowing what he did to me, and now you're asking me to compromise my dignity so you can feel better about your choices. I won't do it." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air. Rachel stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. My mom shook her head, muttering something under her breath about family unity, while Eric just sat there, his smirk gone, replaced by an expression of quiet annoyance. "I'm done," I said, grabbing my bag. "I've spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to be the bigger person. But I'm done sacrificing my happiness and my boundaries for a family that doesn't respect me. I left without another word, ignoring Rachel's call for me to wait. As I drove home, my hands shook with a mix of adrenaline and anger, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. I had stood up for myself, not just against Eric, but against everyone who had enabled his behavior and dismissed my pain. This wasn't the resolution anyone had wanted, but it was the one I needed. I wasn't going to let them bully me into forgiveness or guilt me into playing along with their fantasy of a perfect family. I deserved better than that, even if it meant walking away. In the days following that disastrous family dinner, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at finally standing my ground, anger at how my family had dismissed my feelings, and sadness over the widening rift between me and Rachel. Despite everything, I missed her. She was my sister, my childhood confidante, and it hurt to see how far we had drifted because of her choices. But I also knew I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-worth to repair something she wasn't willing to acknowledge. Rachel had chosen Eric time and time again, and now it was clear she would continue to defend him no matter how much damage he caused. That wasn't something I could fix. Rachel, however, wasn't ready to let things lie. 2 days after the dinner, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I hesitated before opening the door, knowing this conversation would be anything but easy. She stood there with a tense smile, holding a box of muffins like a peace offering. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft. I don't want things to end like this." I sighed, stepping aside to let her in. "Fine, but if you're here to push the godparent thing again, you're wasting your time." Rachel set the muffins on the counter and sat down at my small kitchen table. "I'm not here to pressure you," she said, though her defensive tone betrayed her words. "I just want to understand why you're being so stubborn about this." "Stubborn?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Rachel, I'm not being stubborn. I'm setting boundaries. You're asking me to stand up in front of everyone and endorse the man who tormented me for years. Do you have any idea how humiliating that feels?" Rachel's brows knitted together and she looked down at her hands. "I just thought maybe you could see that he's changed. He's not the same person he was in high school, Lily. He's grown, matured. He regrets the way he treated you." "Then why hasn't he apologized?" I shot back. "If he truly regrets it, why hasn't he come to me himself instead of hiding behind you?" Rachel hesitated, clearly searching for an excuse. He doesn't know how to approach you. He's worried you'll never forgive him no matter what he says." "Of course I won't forgive him," I said bluntly. "Not until he takes responsibility for what he's done. And even then, forgiveness isn't something I owe him or you." Rachel looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "So that's it? You're just going to hold on to this forever?" "Lily, I don't want our baby to grow up in a family that's divided." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before marrying Eric. You knew what he did to me, Rachel, and you married him anyway. Now you're asking me to compromise myself so you can feel better about your decisions. That's not fair." Her tears spilled over, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. But then she spoke, her voice trembling. "I love him, Lily. I know he hurt you, but he's my husband, and I need you to accept that if we're going to move forward." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Rachel, I don't hate you for loving him. I don't even hate him, but I can't pretend everything's fine just because it's what you want. You need to stop asking me to sacrifice my feelings for the sake of family." She wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. "You're not just hurting Eric, you're hurting me. You're hurting our parents. This isn't just about you, Lily." "And that's exactly the problem," I said, standing up. "It's never about me, is it? It's always about making things easier for everyone else. Well, not this time. I won't be the scapegoat anymore." Rachel stared at me, her tears forgotten, replaced by a cold, distant look I hadn't seen before. "If you can't do this for me, for my family, then maybe you're the one who's breaking this family apart." Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. "If that's what you think," I said quietly, "then maybe we both need to rethink what family really means." Rachel stood, grabbing her purse. "You're making a mistake, Lily, one you might regret for the rest of your life." "Or maybe I'm finally doing the right thing," I said, holding the door open for her. She paused for a moment, as if waiting for me to stop her. When I didn't, she walked out without another word, leaving behind the box of muffins on my counter. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's absence felt like both a relief and a loss. My parents called several times, each conversation laced with thinly veiled disappointment. They didn't outright berate me, but their tone made it clear they thought I was in the wrong. "You know, Rachel's really struggling without your support," my mom said during one particularly frustrating call. "Eric's been trying so hard to make peace, but you're shutting him out." I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, if Eric wants to make peace, he can start by apologizing. Until then, I don't want to hear it." She sighed, the sound heavy with disapproval. "I just hope you realize what you're doing, Lily. Families aren't perfect, but they're all we've got." I ended the call shortly after, too drained to keep defending myself. Every conversation felt like a battle, and I was growing tired of fighting. But I also knew I couldn't give in, not when it meant sacrificing my own well-being. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Eric. The subject line read, "An attempt at apology." I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisting with unease. The message was short, just a few paragraphs where he claimed to regret the pain he'd caused me and admitted he had been immature in high school. He didn't mention the therapy incident or the other ways he'd humiliated me as an adult, and the tone felt more defensive than apologetic. "I hope this email shows I'm trying," it concluded. "For Rachel's sake and the baby's, I hope you can find it in your heart to move forward." I stared at the screen, my emotions swirling. This wasn't an apology, it was a checklist, something he'd written to say he'd tried. And once again, it was about Rachel and the baby, not about me or the pain he'd caused. I closed the email without replying. If Eric wanted to make amends, it would take more than a half-hearted note. And if Rachel expected me to compromise myself to keep the peace, she was in for a disappointment. I wasn't going to let them define my worth or my boundaries. Not anymore. The weeks after Eric's so-called apology were quiet but heavy. Rachel and I hadn't spoken since she left my apartment, and though I missed her, I felt a growing sense of clarity. For the first time, I wasn't being dragged into their manipulative games. I wasn't contorting myself to keep the peace, and as painful as the silence was, it felt oddly freeing. Still, I knew the calm wouldn't last. My parents were relentless in their efforts to fix the family, even if it meant completely disregarding my feelings. My mom called one evening to tell me about Rachel's baby shower, clearly expecting me to attend. "It's this Saturday at the house," she said brightly, as if we hadn't been fighting about this for weeks. "Rachel really wants you there, Lily. It would mean so much to her." I sighed, gripping the phone tighter. "Mom, I'm not going to pretend everything's fine for a party. I'm happy for Rachel, but I can't support her the way she wants me to, not with Eric in the picture." "Lily," she said, her tone sharp, "this isn't about Eric, it's about Rachel and the baby. You're her sister, and she needs you. If you don't show up, you'll regret it." That word again, regret. It was the family's favorite weapon, their way of manipulating me into compliance. But I wasn't falling for it this time. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said firmly. "I won't be there." She let out a frustrated sigh, but I didn't stay on the phone long enough to hear her lecture. I hung up, knowing full well that my absence would be interpreted as selfishness. But I didn't care. Protecting my mental health wasn't selfish. It was necessary. On the day of the baby shower, I stayed home, trying to push away the guilt that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I busied myself with cleaning, reading, anything to keep my mind off the event I wasn't attending. But just as I was beginning to feel settled, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to find Rachel standing there, her expression a mix of frustration and sadness. She held a small gift bag in one hand and a folder in the other. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. I stepped aside, wary of what she might say. She set the gift bag on the counter and turned to me, her face tight with emotion. "I know you're upset," she began, "and I know things have been tense, but I couldn't let this go on without trying to make things right." I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I'm listening." She held up the folder, her hand trembling slightly. "Eric asked me to bring this to you. It's everything. The emails, the messages, proof of what he's done. He said he wanted to come clean and he thought this might help. I stared at the folder, unsure whether to feel vindicated or suspicious. Why didn't he bring it himself? Rachel hesitated. Because he knows you don't trust him. And honestly, he was scared. But he gave me this because he wants to take responsibility. I took the folder, flipping it open. Inside were printed copies of emails and messages that detailed Eric's actions. How he'd intentionally sabotaged my relationships with coworkers, how he'd twisted information about me to gain favor with my parents, and even a few humiliating jokes he'd made about me to mutual acquaintances. Reading it was like reliving every painful moment all over again, but there was also something oddly satisfying about seeing it laid out so plainly. When I looked up, Rachel was watching me closely. He knows he was wrong, Lily, she said. He's trying, and I know it might not feel like enough, but it's a start. I set the folder down, my chest tight. It's a start, I admitted, but it doesn't erase what he's done, and it doesn't mean I can suddenly forgive him. Rachel nodded, her shoulders slumping. I understand, but can we start fixing this, please? I hesitated, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger, the justified resentment I'd been carrying for so long. But another part of me, the part that still loved my sister despite everything, wanted to believe this was an opportunity to move forward. I don't know if I can forgive him, I said honestly, but I'll think about it. For you. Her eyes filled with tears and she stepped forward to hug me. I stiffened at first, but then I let her in, the familiar warmth of her embrace stirring a mix of emotions. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I'm asking for. Over the next few weeks, I started setting boundaries with my family in a way I never had before. I made it clear that I wasn't ready to forgive Eric, but I was willing to rebuild my relationship with Rachel on my terms. Eric stayed out of the picture for now, which gave me space to focus on reconnecting with my sister without the shadow of his presence. Rachel and I started having regular coffee dates, slowly easing back into the closeness we once shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. As for Eric, I still couldn't bring myself to trust him. His so-called apology and the folder of evidence felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. But I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean reconciliation. I didn't have to welcome him into my life to move on from the pain he'd caused. The baby was born a month later, a beautiful little girl named Emily. Rachel invited me to the hospital to meet her, and as I held my niece for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the perfect resolution I had once dreamed of, but it was something. A chance to rebuild, to redefine what family meant on my terms. I wasn't the godparent, and I had made peace with that. Instead, I was Emily's aunt, a role I could embrace without compromising my boundaries. And for now, that was enough.